Hello everybody, my name is Jer and welcome back to my channel. So due to an unexpected major depressive breakdown, which honestly I don't think I could be held responsible for, I may have gotten very behind, so expect to see a few more of these a week than normal. Something is happening here and I don't like it. So we are going to be continuing our discussion about Dead Like Me. We're in season 2 and this is episode 6 in Escrow. This is a really incredible episode. I think pretty much everything from this point forward are all episodes that I really enjoy, and I love all of these wide story arcs that we have going throughout the rest of the season. And we're about to get into some pretty important major ones. So we'll start out with the Lasses, who in previous episodes have been working to try to sell their house. Reggie has actively been trying to make sure that this doesn't happen, and Reggie's about to get her wish. So the house goes in escrow, the couple decides to buy it, and throughout the episode we see Reggie and Joy go to downtown because they're just kind of doing their thing, and they happen to see that there are some loft apartments that are available to rent, so they go check it out. And there's this nice man named Angelo who's renting out one, and they both really love the loft. Joy even says that she wants that life. Angelo is really great. He invites Joy to come back later and listen to the music on the rooftop, which she does, and while she's gone, the babysitter who is supposed to be watching Reggie just totally dips and might be a psychopath. So Joy goes to visit the apartment at night, and it's everything that she wants, and she ends up spending a little bit of time with Angelo, and he is such a great counterbalance for her. He can see through her sadness. He can see through this, he can see through this facade that she puts up. And I think he can tell that she doesn't have it all together as much as she pretends that she does. And I really like Angelo. I would like to hope that if season 3 had ever happened, he would have been cast as a major recurring character, because he's a really great balance for Joy. And he ends up sketching her, and he captures that sadness, but then he sketches her one more time and he sketches her happy. Angelo also tells Joy at one point that he thinks that she could be a writer because she looks like she's got stories to tell. And this is the one thing that I think the Dead Like Me movie really did right, was introducing Joy as a writer, telling her stories, because she definitely has that type of aura that she's got things that she could teach people. And she's been through so much, you know, she was so unhappy for so long and had to learn how to make herself happy again, and rediscovering herself after the loss of her daughter. There's so much that she's had to go through, and that's something that Angelo sees right through her, right off the get-go. While Reggie is home alone, she hears some voices upstairs, and she ends up calling the police because she doesn't have her babysitter with her. The police come, and Joy gets there and is freaking out that the police are there, and they're like, "Your daughter heard voices, but don't worry, there's nobody in the house." They have to call Child Protective Services. But what this ends up translating to, and we had seen this in a previous episode where Joy was walking around the house and there was a loud thump from upstairs, we got to see the effects of that, is that there's some type of crack in the roof, and Joy can't afford it. So the buyers backed out, they're gonna go get another house, and Escrow has fallen out. In Escrow is kind of an interesting play on words, because obviously escrow has to do with that period right after you decide to buy a house and right before the deal completely closes. And we kind of see how some of those characters are reacting in their kind of purgatory moment. Reggie even mentions it, that escrow is like purgatory, and that's what a lot of the characters are going through, and that's what we're seeing with them. So with Mason, he gets a reap to go get this retired rocker from a band called Churchyard. He actually went to one of their concerts back in the 60s, and he idolized the group so much that he decided to chase a permanent high like they had been doing. You know, the drugs, the sex, the music, everything about it was so enticing to him, which is why he ended up drilling a hole through his head to try to get that permanent high. And this rocker ends up overdosing and dies. But he tells Mason in the end, none of it was really worth it. He felt invincible, but he chased away his family. He chased away everybody who was important to him. And he didn't mean to, because he was just trying to constantly get that feeling, that constant high feeling that he never really could achieve. And Mason ends up admitting that immortality is not all that it was cracked up to be. And it's interesting for Mason because his purgatory, we always kind of get this sense that he loves being a Reaper, that he's happy doing it, but there's this underlying sadness that's always there, and this episode really highlighted that for him. And we also see these parallels where this rocker pushed away everybody doing his thing, and Mason throughout the series has constantly done these things where he pushes away the other members of the group because of his actions and his irresponsibility. I mean, Rube doesn't trust him at all. Rube constantly tells him that he doesn't trust him to do his job. And we're constantly seeing that he tries to get Daisy, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. And even with George, who he's possibly the closest to, she gets fed up with him sometimes and just wants to have nothing to do with him. And we see that interesting parallel between this rock star and Mason. Rube and Roxy don't really have much of an impact on this episode, but surprisingly, I'm gonna save my last character as Daisy. Georgia mentions in the beginning of the episode that her mother put her through ballroom dancing when she was a kid, but the only thing that she remembered was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's something that's echoed at the end. Her arc kind of focuses on games. Rock, paper, scissors, duck, duck, goose, 4Zs, 5Zs. She's having these moments where the afterlife is kind of a game for her. And when she's looking for her reap, it's a game of when can she get them. And you're always gonna get caught by death. You just don't know when it's gonna happen. Georgia's purgatory is interesting because she is almost learning how to get out of it. Shows like Lucifer and American Horror Story Coven, where they talk about purgatory and the afterlife being this place of your greatest fear or your worst failure in your life, and that's what you're constantly reliving in the afterlife again and again and again. But if you figure out how to beat that, then you can get out of purgatory and you can move on to light. And that's kind of what the afterlife has been for George, is she's constantly kind of recycling these moments from her life where she was pushing everybody away. She didn't want to have anything to do with anybody. She just wanted to do her own thing, and she's learning how to break out of that. And in this episode, we see Georgia pull right back into that type of person that she was, where she doesn't like responsibility. She doesn't want to have any power or authority. She just wants to kind of do her things her way. That is what is fascinating about this episode, is that we get to see George fall back into those old habits, but unlike in the Shallow End where she went back into those old habits and was just mean, in this one we really get a sense of what George was like before she died, that just really indecisive person that she is, because Dolores gives her an assignment to choose a candidate for this company called Lunateca. They need somebody now, like today. And Millie has to go through these 3 candidates. We have Michael, who is super gassy and just farts all the time. We have Anton, who is a Chechnyan doctor. And we have Margaret Paddington, like the bear, and she is this older woman who is taking care of her family, and both of her parents died, and she feels like she has this superpower where she can just disappear, and she has to get back into the workforce to make herself feel alive. And Millie has to choose one of these 3 candidates, and none of them are really perfect for the job. And they all are kind of harassing her in their own way, which again goes back to that purgatory, because George was always getting harassed by her mom to do something, to make a decision, to just go for it. And George never really wanted to. And now she has these 3 voices who are telling her, you know, pick me, pick me, pick me, and she can't. She even says at one point to Daisy that, how does she choose and why should she choose them? And Daisy tells her that she's a lot like Hamlet. Hamlet couldn't make a decision, and we find out that Daisy got to play Ophelia in a stage play at one point. Georgia says that death doesn't get indecisive. Death just picks, and she ends up picking up her frog and letting the frog pick, which is a fun parallel to season 1, where the frog is the reason why death happens in the world. The frog picks Anton, but unfortunately, George has already let a full 24 hours pass, and that night, Rube sends Mason to let them know that there's going to be a group reap in the morning. Earlier that day, and happy time, Dolores had gotten a phone call from Ned Benjamin, who was the kind of head of Lunateca, and he was furious that he didn't have his staffer that he needed from Happy Time. And the next day during the group reap, where they're all outside, they're getting these 13 people, and then here comes Ned Benjamin holding a big bag, and it's revealed that he had a weapon and he shot everybody in Lunateca. He just snapped. He killed everybody, including himself. This might be one of the worst, this is the worst series of deaths, right next to the Halloween episode, which is pretty tragic, because especially here in America, shootings are so prevalent that it's so triggering and terrifying. But then this matter is compounded even more by the fact that Anton was the one who the frog picked, and Anton ended up getting killed. It was because George didn't make a decision, and she even says later that Hamlet couldn't make a decision and everybody died. She's seen these things before, where when she pulls the wrong piece out of the Jenga tower, it all comes crumbling down. That time where she saved a guy and ended up getting like 30 people in the city killed with that little fat burner. She had a job and she needed to make a decision, and she didn't. She kind of realizes that she's still in her purgatory. She hasn't gotten out. She's had these moments where she's circled around the edges and she's almost figured out how to get out of that pattern, but she keeps getting sucked right back into the whirlpool. And George's purgatory is that she is always going to be fighting this battle inside of her of being responsible and being irresponsible. And unfortunately, her indecision ended up getting all these people killed. You could argue that Ned Benjamin would have killed everybody at Lunateca anyway at some point, because he would have eventually just snapped, but because Millie didn't make a decision, it made the matters worse. And she goes back to Dolores and says, I don't want all this responsibility, somebody else should take it. So like I said, I want to talk about Daisy last, because even though she had a pretty short arc, there were a lot of important moments that happened. So in the beginning of the episode, Roxy tries to convince Daisy to give up her cross because the family of the old woman who died in the first episode, they want their cross back. It's expensive, and Daisy doesn't want to give it up. It's interesting that this conversation is happening now because it's been several weeks since that death, and that the family would be accusing the cops now of stealing it rather than like weeks ago when it first disappeared. Or maybe they finally were just going through all her stuff and were like, where's the cross? And Daisy's just like, I'm not giving it up. I'm not giving it away. This is mine. Daisy goes to confessional. She tells the preacher that she has done something wrong and she stole something. She calls it petty larceny, which was funny. And he asks what she's stolen. She says that she stole a cross, and he asks why. And she has another great one-liner where she says, I think the act speaks for itself. She ends up telling him that she needed the cross and that the old woman was dead. She didn't need it anymore. And he tells her that she needed it just as much as Daisy did. And he tries to dig down to why she took it. And all she wants is her penance. And this is another purgatory situation where Daisy just wants to get out. She doesn't care what it costs, she doesn't care what she has to do. She will do anything at this point. She just wants to know how she can make things right so she can get out. And in this situation, she thinks that by getting her penance, by doing the Hail Marys, by doing act of contritions, by, doing whatever she needs to do, she will get out of this and move on. And she even says near the end of this conversation that she's waiting for something, and the cross makes her feel closer to it. And this is a really vulnerable moment for Daisy because we don't see these types of vulnerable moments often. The last time we really saw something this heavy and deep was when they were doing their filing at Happy Time, and she says, why does everybody's last thought, why is it all so sad? Why are people always regretting things? And when Georgia said that she just seems sad about something, it's this moment. Daisy is waiting for her lights. Daisy is waiting to move on, and she can't. She's stuck here, and she doesn't want to be anymore, and she's willing to do anything to get out. Daisy is very classic bargaining, and if we look at each one of these characters as representing a stage of grief, Daisy is bargaining 100% of the time. And that's what makes Daisy's arc this episode so important and so impactful, because we're seeing this deeper side of her in each episode. They're just peeling back these layers of Daisy and showing us more and more of her. And this one, we really got that vulnerability from her that I think we keep seeing echoes of over the last couple of reaps. Favorite quote from this episode is from Dolores. When she's telling Millie that she gets all this responsibility, she tells her, it's like being the prettiest girl at prom. or the sluttiest if you went to Catholic school. Dolores and Daisy always have my favorite quotes, and I won't apologize for it. Overall, this episode is fantastic, and it makes me very emotional watching it again. I will be watching another one very shortly and hopefully posting that within the next day or hours, who knows. But I need to catch up if I want to do the last episode on Halloween, which I really want to do. And I think I've decided, because I do own the Dead Like Me movie, I am going to do that. So when this series ends on Halloween, I will do one last episode, and then I want to talk about the fanfic that I made for season 3, if any of you are interested in hearing about that. And if you're not, I might just do it anyway. Okay, bye.